Alright, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayersToo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, that just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
Hello. It's going okay, Mark. Yeah, things are alright. It's been a while since we've seen each other.
It is indeed. We have been both very busy with work. I have been stuck in my little home office and Lewis has been gallivanting about the country. So we apologise for missing a couple of episodes back to back there. Again, 2-man operation here. If something goes wrong, it goes all wrong. Yeah. But Lewis, what have you been playing during our little unplanned break?
Yeah, I guess I'll just sum up what's been happening over the last few weeks, which, I mean, ultimately kind of boils down to finishing all of my endings on Nier Automata. It is over, Mark.
Oh, nice one, man. That is awesome.
Yeah.
Very good.
I totally loved this game. In the end, I really heartily enjoyed it in a way that I didn't expect to. It's almost entirely different from everything that I imagined about it. And that's not about the story, I should say, because I knew going in that the story was going to be kind of interesting and full of kind of twists and turns and unexpected things going on. And it's both the actual narrative and the structure of how that narrative is delivered to you that has all of that in it. I was expecting that, and that stuff delivered, and it was intriguing and weird, and in video game terms, like, I thought really well executed, to be honest, in terms of like how they made you feel for the characters and where that kind of journey took you until you get to the end and you sort of see how it all unravels. And like, having got the 5 endings, like the A through E endings, great, like, it is left in a really solid point. But the actual, as I said at multiple points during my playthrough, the actual experience of playing this game was completely different from what I expected. Like, I thought it was going to be way more RPG-ish, in that there would be so much more kind of stats to track and trying to make different types of build. And you can go into that kind of depth through the game, absolutely. Like, you can think about what weapons you want to use. You can allocate your plug-in chips in a way that gives you, more defensive boosts or more attacking boosts or whatever suits your playstyle. But you categorically do not have to pay attention to really any of that stuff. Like, if you do that once, and if you set up with just kind of like what you think is the best, that will carry you comfortably through the game. Like, I found the game really straightforward, like very little challenge in it. And again, I said this before, and I want to reiterate, like, I'm not saying that as a criticism, like, because it was fun. It was a fun experience to get through, unlike some other really challenging games can be. That part of it was fantastic. The other thing I really want to say is that I think, and we kind of briefly spoke about this off air, but I think the language that is used about this game is wrong and off-putting to a lot of players, in that people refer to this as having multiple playthroughs with multiple endings. And, like, I just don't think that is an accurate way to describe this game.
I mean, it's sort of difficult to argue in the first 2 playthroughs, which are sort of the same thing.
Sort of, yeah.
But it is one overall experience playing this game through the E ending, right? I mean, that is what the playthrough is. It's not multiple playthroughs. 100%. That is the playthrough. Yeah. Yes, I'm so glad that you got this. I completely agree.
Yeah, to anyone who is listening to this, who maybe even after everything I've said over the last few weeks has still been kind of doubtful of what they've heard about this game, you might not think it's for you. I certainly wasn't convinced it was going to be for me going into it, but this is a straightforward story. It's not a straightforward story, but it is a straightforward story in that you don't have to replay everything all the time. You, as you say, Mark, the A and the B endings have some elements that you do play again, but you're playing as a different character, you have a different perspective, and their journey diverges about halfway through that playthrough. And apart from that, nothing else is the same. And the other endings are simply other perspectives at different points in a timeline. And it feels like describing playing The Last of Us 2 as being like, as saying you have to play that through twice. It's just a nonsense. Like, that is not what's going on, even though it's temporarily like in the same place. So, yeah. Anyway.
I get what you're saying. I mean, that is slightly different.
It is different to that,
I
but
agree. Like, the whole playthrough is getting to that ending. Do you know what I mean? That is the playthrough of the game.
There are different characters and different perspectives and different timelines going on, and that is it. And so just please no one be put off playing this game from the feeling that, oh, I'm going to have to replay this multiple times, and I don't want to do that. It is not like that, and it is fun as hell to play, by and large. So yeah, I'm glad I played it. I would recommend it to people. Again, if you have been paying attention to my gaming tastes, you would maybe expect that this wouldn't be for me, and I'm telling you I enjoyed it, so that is an endorsement, I would say.
Yeah, I would say that is as well, because I genuinely thought this one was pretty 50-50 on whether or not you were going to like it or not. So I'm very, very glad that you did like it, because this was obviously one of the things that you had to play for, losing one of our various gaming bets, which you continue to lose. But I genuinely was a bit unsure about how you would react to it, and I'm so glad that you've reacted positively. That is fantastic news.
What about you, Mark? What have you been playing?
Well, Lewis, I finished A Plague's Tale: Innocence, a game
stuff.
which I have to say I really, 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 really enjoyed. It felt really old school, and again, I think that just comes with the sort of AA size and scope of the game. It just felt like a very straightforward video game, and I just liked that. You know what I mean? I didn't have to, as you were saying, think about 1,000 RPG elements or collectibles or any of this nonsense. Do you know what I mean? It was just play the game and absorb the story, you know?
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the setting as well. I thought that was a really cool time to set a weird alternate history in during the French 100 Years' War, the French and English 100 Years' War, I suppose. It was really good. I really, really enjoyed it a lot. And it is set up nicely for a sequel, and A Plague's Tale Requiem is just around the corner now, which I am now really, really excited about. I would highly recommend you play this game. There's almost a 0% chance that I don't think that you would enjoy this, to be honest, Liz. I really, really do think that you'd like it. And since then, I've then went on to play Stray, Lewis.
Oh, nice.
I've not finished it yet. I've not finished it yet, but I mean, playing as a cute little cat is just a hell of a lot of fun. I mean, it's just awesome. It's fantastically cool. I think I'm about a third of the way through, I would say, ballparking it. This game isn't what I expected it to be.
Oh, really?
I will say that much. Yeah, I haven't said that. I wasn't really sure what I was expecting from the game. I think that I agree with something that you said, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe that you said the sort of combat, quote unquote, combat, can basically take a run and jump as far as I'm concerned. I'm 100% put off by all of them. Not put off that I'm using the wrong language here, but it's just something I could have done without. You know what I mean? If this game was just an environmental puzzle game, it had no fail state at all, I would be quite happy just kicking about as a little cat and dealing with all that. Do you know what I mean? And in this world as well, which I think is really interesting and set up incredibly well. And it feels weirdly as if I don't want to say that they've squandered it, because again, I do think this is quite a good idea, and I am enjoying playing as the cat, to be clear, but it feels as though they've set up a much grander world that is very juxtaposed to playing it as just a cat kicking about. You know what I mean? It feels as though a really deep and wide spreading story could be taking place here, but instead you're just sort of kicking about as a cat. Do you know what I mean? Which is quite cool, and I do quite enjoy that. But I don't know, I would almost like to see them do another game in this world where you don't play as a cat and you play like maybe a sort of more combat focused type thing
potentially
in the world. I would be 100% game for that, because it is a really interesting world and just space that they've set up that you can kick about in, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. A really dense world, as you say, that's really textured. There's a lot happening in the wee snippets of story that you get from different characters around, particularly that kind of main hub zone where the kind of bar and all that is that you're interacting with. I think everything that you said there, I think, is a pretty astute observation, because like this world and that's within this game could easily be fleshed out, even the way that, well, actually, I was about to spoil it all, but even though I finished it yet.
Don't spoil it. Probably don't spoil it yet.
Yeah, the way it ends would allow for future games and different possibilities. Like, I won't say more than that, but I could totally imagine this being a world that is returned to, because it does feel like it's been well set up. So why abandon it?
Absolutely, and I really hope that the studio does do that, because again, it would almost be a shame if this was the only game that took place in that world. Did you know what I mean? And again, not to say that this isn't fun or I'm having a bad time in any capacity with it, because I'm really not. I'm really enjoying playing the game. I'm quite looking forward to getting back to playing it, to be honest with you, but it just feels as though the world that they've setup demands a grander game. Do you know what I mean?
Because quite clearly something really bad has happened, and this wee cat is not really going to suss it all out.
Yeah, but it's dystopian and just interesting in a lot of different ways. It's very, very cool. I'm enjoying it a lot.
Good.
Really
I'm glad. I'm really glad.
All right, Lewis, on that note, I think it is time for the news. All right, Lewis, news item number 1. The Microsoft Activision deal and the drama surrounding it, the back and forth rumbles on. Firstly, the Brazilian regulators, which sort of started this all being discussed in a public forum, have now approved the deal with no restrictions. The US Federal Trade Commission are apparently expected to make a ruling on the deal as well by late November. The European Commission have apparently set a provisional date of November the 8th to clear the deal. However, before that or on that date, they could send it for a second, more detailed investigation, similarly to what the CMA have done here in the UK. And speaking of the CMA list and their Phase 2 investigation, Xbox have made a rather damning statement regarding their investigation, saying that the CMA's concerns are quote-unquote misplaced and that they adopted Sony's complaints without appropriate levels of critical review. So I'm just going to get Lewis to read the important parts of this statement, to be honest with you, rather than me paraphrasing it. So Lewis, take it away.
These unsupported theories of harm are not sufficient to justify a reference to Phase 2. The suggestion that the incumbent market leader, with clear and enduring market power, could be foreclosed by the third largest provider as a result of losing access to one title is not credible. Sony engages in conduct today which is reflective of its market power in console gaming, including increasing prices of its consoles without fear of losing market share. In short, Sony is not vulnerable to a hypothetical foreclosure strategy, and the referral decision incorrectly relies on self-serving statements by Sony which insignificantly exaggerate the importance of Call of Duty to it, and neglect to account for Sony's clear ability to competitively respond. While Sony may not welcome increased competition, it has the ability to adapt and compete. Gamers will ultimately benefit from this increased competition and choice. Should any consumers decide to switch from a gaming platform that does not give them a choice as to how to pay for new games, i.e. PlayStation, to one that does, i.e. Xbox, then that is the sort of consumer switching behaviour that the CMA should consider welfare enhancing and indeed encourage. It is not something that the CMA should be trying to prevent.
Lewis, even Take-Two CEO Strauss Zelnick has weighed in here, saying that he thinks that the deal would be good for the industry. I have no idea what he gains from that, but he did say that. While PlayStation have continued to emphasise how much this deal would hurt them, now saying that Call of Duty players could still switch to Xbox even if the game wasn't an exclusive, because Xbox could differentiate the versions to incentivise people to play it on Xbox even beyond it being on Game Pass, which is a really weird point to make because that is exactly what PlayStation have been doing with Call of Duty for years. Even today, I believe that they rolled out an ad about how PlayStation were getting exclusive content on the next Call of Duty game. Anyway, Lewis, what do you make of all this? I must admit, I was never expecting to deal with this in a public way the way that we are right now. It is very, very fascinating to me, and I think that PlayStation are in a sort of difficult position here because they are trying to say that this will do us a great deal of harm from a position, as Xbox have rightly pointed out, of being the market leader and of immense strength within the industry, you know? It's fascinating to see this back and forward, it really is.
Oh, it absolutely is, and yeah, you're spot on. I never thought that this would play out like this. I think if you even cast your mind back to like the Bethesda deal, none of this kind of stuff was going on, or certainly not in a public way. I don't remember us talking about these kinds of counter arguments and sort of public bickering really that is happening between these two companies.
And I don't know if that's just a function of the size of this deal.
Possibly,
I genuinely don't know,
yeah.
But you're right. Around the Bethesda deal, there was nothing like this going on.
And considering like how many unknowns there were with that Bethesda deal that we would debate, you know, would a certain game be on PlayStation, blah, blah, blah. We have been getting answers about Call of Duty throughout this process, whether or not they turn out to be true. And obviously, like, Jim Ryan has exposed some of what has been said as not quite accurate, but this whole thing is mad. I still think that this is all going to go through fine. I even think that the CMA's extra phase will probably not lead to very much. we have said a bunch of times, like, maybe it'll lay down some special decision around Call of Duty's exclusivity particularly, but I honestly wouldn't be surprised if nothing comes of it, and this is just a bit of a business process that everyone has to go through. But these snipes back and forward are crazy. Like, the fact that Xbox here, they refer to themselves as like the third player in the numbers, which again,
assuming Nintendo being second, which is sort of wild for them to say that.
Maybe true in certain senses, but we did get numbers for Game Pass this week, which for the first time ever, really, about the level of money that Game Pass is bringing into Microsoft,
which also came out because of this process, by the way.
Exactly.
They weren't forthcoming with that.
No, and they never have been, and for years they've not been forthcoming about their player numbers or any of that stuff. So, but we have seen how powerful Microsoft actually are in the gaming space through those numbers alone. So it's all kind of slippery. Like, for them to say, oh, we're only the little third player in the market, and big old Sony is talking rubbish. Meanwhile, Sony is quite rightly pointing out a lot of the bullshit that Sony themselves have been doing for years. Like, they are only pointing out a strategy that maybe other companies should have been calling Sony out in these kinds of forums before now. Maybe they couldn't have done that, but it is so wild to see these industry titans kind of tear lumps out of each other, expose themselves in all sorts of interesting and kind of stupid ways in a certain sense. Ultimately, I think Call of Duty will leave PlayStation probably down the line, years down the line, or in its fullest form it will, and that will hurt PlayStation. I don't think it will hurt PlayStation quite as much as PlayStation want everyone to think. I don't think it will do as little harm as Xbox are trying to suggest here. We're all somewhere in the middle of this.
I would agree with that, basically. To your point, I think that it is vastly more likely that nothing happens than this deal fails. Do you know what I mean? I think that there is a reasonable chance that something might happen around Call of Duty, but in terms of this deal being stopped in any way, that is not going to happen. Like, this deal is going to go through categorically. And again, to your point, I do think that somewhere down the line, Call of Duty will be an Xbox exclusive, and I think that will be whenever their next console comes out, because that's the sort of time frame that they were talking about, still making it available on PlayStation. And whenever the Xbox Series X2 comes out, your flagship game on that will not be Halo, it will be Call of Duty. That will be the big launch title. That's what I'm sort of imagining, because they are only willing to commit to PlayStation for 3 years, and if things go to plan for them, I imagine that they make it an exclusive on the next generation, basically. So in terms of what Xbox are talking about right now being like the third player in the game, I mean, they're right, they are that, and Sony being this enormous market leader, and again, they're right, Sony are that, but they know for a fact that down the line, that could massively flip just on this title, just because they can make it exclusive when this whole cycle starts again, and I think that that's what they're playing for, personally.
I think you're bang on there,
Alright, listen, news item number 2. Speaking of Xbox, Phil Spencer's shelves have been at it again, Lewis. For those that don't know, Phil Spencer has previously had a Series X within his bookshelf, and when he's been in interviews on like Zoom meetings and whatever, the console was visible before it was even launched. And more recently, he had a Kojima Productions figurine on one of his shelves before it was announced that they were going to be working with Kojima. Now we have a small white box spotted on his shelves, which looks like a Series S but smaller, basically. And we now have people like Tom Warren over at The Verge and many others as well claiming that this is Xbox's quote-unquote Keystone streaming device, e.g. this will be the device that you plug straight into your TV that will allow you to stream games through your TV without the need to actually own an Xbox. And this is all but being confirmed by the official Xbox Twitter, who replied to that image saying, "Now what did we say about putting old prototypes on your shelf, boss?" So, I mean, it definitely is. I mean, this is definitely the piece of hardware, at least maybe in a prototype form, sitting on his shelf. It is something that we already knew about. Like, we knew that this piece of hardware was coming at some point down the line. And in fact, in May, Xbox said that they were actually rethinking the development of Keystone, implying that it may be some ways down the line. So I'm not suggesting that this is necessarily round the corner in any capacity. But I suppose my question is, how much do you think that this device will matter in the console spectrum? Do you know what I mean? Like, how much demand do you think that there is for just a solely streaming Xbox device, which I suppose is basically just a Game Pass device? In reality, that's what they'll be pitching it as. They'll sell this wee box with a controller, shove it straight in your TV, and you can stream any game you want on Game Pass as part of your subscription. What are your thoughts here?
Sort of mixed, to be honest. I mean, I've always thought this was likely and, you know, in theory, quite a decent idea. Essentially, what I think Microsoft's kind of long-term play with this, and in reality, with doing things like putting Game Pass onto, or xCloud onto Samsung TVs a couple of months back, sure. I think ultimately what this is about is making that ready accessibility of streaming games kind of feel normal to people. I don't think it's a console strategy for just now, really. It's sort of a longer term play in terms of shifting attitudes over like the next decade. I think that ultimately will work for a lot of people. The thing to me is, like, people like you and I, Mark, would never really buy this sort of thing because we have the consoles, or we would prioritize getting the consoles, and a lot of other people are already going to have like quality PC builds and stuff that would sort of render this, you know, what is essentially like an Amazon Fire Stick but just loaded up with Game Pass. Like, it kind of renders a lot of that moot. Where it would be useful though is for things like traveling, if you're going to stay in hotels for a few nights, although can you rely on their internet for streaming? Who knows? Well,
exactly, that is the ultimate question around this still, isn't it? Like, how reliable is your connection?
So, I mean, and it will be for years to come. That's kind of why I'm saying I think it's a longer term play, really. I think in the short term though, what will happen is a lot of like games media types will be very excited about it because it will allow them to essentially take all their gaming on the go all the time, you know, without having to lug around consoles or whatever. It changes that sort of thing. But a decade from now, I think you might be starting to see that normal people who wouldn't really consider themselves gamers have this in their house. Like, they just get bought one for Christmas because it's 40 quid or whatever, or it's just built into their TV. So
I think it's going to be more than that.
Well, whatever it may be. But down the line, like, they will do everything to make that as cheap as possible, right? You would almost give it away for free if you could then get the money back through subscriptions and then through game sales and through add-ons. So
I think we see it as like maybe $100 with a controller and maybe 80 without one, or something like that. You know what I mean?
I could see that. Yeah, you know, ultimately, I think they'll try and push all that down, and they'll try and make it the sort of normie way to play video games, I guess, down the line. In a world where way more people will play video games because we've all grown up with it in a way that our like parents' generation didn't. You know.
Yeah, definitely. I think that makes a whole lot of sense. In terms of how much demand there is for a streaming service, why don't we move on to news item number 3, Lewis?
Yes, please.
Google have confirmed that they are shutting down Stadia as of January the 18th. I know this one technically happened a week ago, but we were off, but I feel as though we need to speak about this one. Phil Harrison, Stadia's general manager, has said this regarding the closure.
For many years, Google has invested across multiple aspects of the gaming industry. We help developers build and distribute gaming apps on Google Play and Google Play Games. Gaming creators are reaching audiences around the world on YouTube through videos, live streaming, and shorts, and our cloud streaming technology delivers immersive gameplay at massive scale. A few years ago, we also launched a consumer gaming service, Stadia. You may have heard of it. And while Stadia's approach to streaming games for consumers was built on a strong technological foundation, it hasn't gained the traction with users that we expected. So we've made the difficult decision to begin winding down our Stadia streaming service. We remain deeply committed to gaming, and we will continue to invest in new tools, technologies, and platforms that power the success of developers, industry partners, cloud customers, and creators. For the Stadia team, building and supporting Stadia from the ground up has been fueled by the same passion for games that our players have. Many of the Stadia team members will be carrying this work forward in other parts of the company. We're so grateful for the groundbreaking work of the team, and we look forward to continuing to have an impact across gaming and other industries using the foundational Stadia streaming technology.
Once you cut through the vast river of bullshit that was, I think that the real question is, why do people continue to hire Phil Harrison to launch their products? The man has never done it once well. Ooh. He's never done it once well. It's insane. That line of, you may have heard of it, you may have heard of Stadia. It was like, mate, it was your job to make sure we had all heard of it. Honestly.
Yeah, this is, I mean, the thing here, you're totally right about Phil Harrison. Like, he's been failing up for some time.
Spectacularly. He's failed up to Google. How did he do that?
He's failed up through some of the biggest tech companies on earth, and he's failed all the way up to this point. The thing to me, I mean, I was going to kind of make the gag here of like, what a stunning surprise this is. I can't believe this has happened. Obviously, every single one of us called this at the time.
Yeah.
I think we even had people on our Twitter, of all places, calling us out and sort of saying like, you need to give it a chance. And, you know, it never gave us any reason to give it a chance. I think that's the fairest way to put that.
Yeah, I think that you are very much on the side of caution from this from day one, whereas I was sort of a bit more excited about the prospect.
Like, you believe in it though, not necessarily this product, but this future, and I've always been a bit more skeptical.
Well, that's sort of where I was going with this, I suppose. Well, just before we hit on that point, I have to say that Ubisoft, who were a big backer of Stadia, Bungie and IO Interactive have all said that they are looking for ways for their players to transfer their Stadia accounts to other services. However, they are massively in the minority, and most players who bought games on Stadia, those games will just be gone, which just fucking sucks. And a reminder that these days when you buy a game, you own nothing, ladies and gentlemen. But yeah, on the sort of streaming future and Keystone and this being sort of back-to-back news items, like, I still do sort of think that 20 years from now, and I do think that might be the time frame that we're literally talking about here, I don't really think consoles are going to exist. I think that we might just have apps on computers that can stream games as good as we could ever play them in our homes. Do you know what I mean? However, I think that Stadia, apart from their terrible business model, have sort of proven that we're not quite there with the technology either. Like, there's still just a wee bit too much lag, and there's still not really the global infrastructure to support it yet, you know what I mean? However, I do think that the way that Xbox are doing this and just sort of like pushing it, sort of in the same way that like PlayStation are still like pushing and probing at VR, Xbox are sort of pushing and probing at this sort of streaming future. I think that they're doing it a lot more sensibly and at a pace where more people will likely pick it up. You know what I mean? You're not all in immediately, you know?
Yeah, absolutely that. I think Xbox's strategy, sort of a wee bit as I was suggesting before, is it's sort of like put streaming in alongside a broader product range in order to slowly change people's attitudes towards what they're doing. So it's after a few years of Keystone, say, people might be more like, oh yeah, like my Series X is busted, I probably should get a new console. I could just get this Keystone thing. It plays most of the games fine. I'll do that. I'll change it up, and that will start to change things. But Xbox aren't saying everything is behind this gate of how good your internet connection is, and that's the only way of doing it. And the other thing, obviously, that Xbox have done way better than anyone that's entered this space so far is the price point and the model there, because where Stadia first went wrong was making it a per game basis rather than a subscription service in the way that GamePass is.
Do you know what I mean? We need to remember that was basically pre-Game Pass, though, when that was first being talked about, because we're still talking about a Netflix of games then, and Game Pass has just become that.
Yeah, Game Pass, I think Game Pass existed then, but wasn't what it is now, certainly, and that's sure. Like, that shows you why Xbox have thought very carefully about what the eventual product offer should be to consumers, which is like a subscription model that also includes streaming rather than a streaming model.
And they've taken steps to do that in a time frame which is reasonable.
Yeah, it can take people along. Yeah, absolutely. Well, pour one out for Stadia tonight, Mark. I think that's the thing to do. We said it didn't take very long, and Google will do this again in the gaming space and elsewhere.
Guaranteed. Alright, list news item number 4. Overwatch 2 has launched, replacing the original Overwatch with a free-to-play model. However, it is the latest in a long line of service games to have launched extremely poorly. Not helped by a DDoS attack on launch day, I have to admit, which apparently they were completely unable to deal with. There has been a litany of server issues, and apparently 2 characters were even pulled from the game briefly for quote-unquote maintenance, although there has been numerous reports that actually a whole bunch of characters have been not available for spells of time. This has been such a disaster that Blizzard are offering refunds to gamers who paid 35 quid for a Waypoint pack and are compensating all gamers with in-game content. But one of the main things around this, which has caused a lot of issues, I mean, just outside of general server problems and bugs and all that, is a 2FA system which has been implemented in the game. 2FA is two-factor authentication, which I think a lot of people are now familiar with logging on to certain websites, logging into banking apps and things like that. It's just a company sending you a text on your phone just to make sure you are who you say you are. Generally speaking, I am a big fan of 2FA systems. They are vastly more secure, and if there is an option to do 2FA 90% of the time, I would suggest that that is a box you should always tick. However, in this application, it doesn't seem to work specifically with prepaid phones for no obvious reason. And obviously, this means that people without a contract phone won't be able to play the game at all. And a lot of people, for example, a lot of people under 18, a lot of people who probably make up quite a lot of the player base of Overwatch, won't be able to play this game. It will also disproportionately affect low-income families who can't afford contract phones, which means that you can now be basically too poor to play Overwatch, which is a very, very sad state of affairs, Lewis. Fortunately, the utter chaos that this system has caused, because even people with contract phones seem to have been having issues with it, Blizzard has pulled this requirement and it is no longer required to play Overwatch 2. If you want to play Overwatch 2, anyone can. Anyone currently can. However, and perhaps more worryingly, the upcoming Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 will also apparently have a 2FA system in order to play the game, which might mean that you are very soon too poor to play Call of Duty, which is horrible. It's a really horrible situation. Don't get me wrong, I understand the reason why they're doing this. The reason why they're doing this is to help prevent toxicity in their chats and things like that, so that they can easily ban people and make sure that they can't just pop up with a new account the next day, so that they can prevent cheaters, so that they can prevent people having multiple accounts, things like that, which is all good for a multiplayer game, do you know what I mean? But this system has been implemented incredibly poorly if it's sectioning off huge amounts of players, millions of players that want to play your game, you know?
Yeah, this is a total shambles. A shambles of proportions I didn't really quite grasp until we started talking about this 2FA thing, because that is just a really horrible situation for players to find themselves in. If you're being effectively gated out of a fucking free-to-play game.
I know, that's insane. You're too poor for a free-to-play game. That is the situation that some people might find themselves in. And I'm not just saying that sort of hyperbolically. Like, there was several people on Reddit using those exact words to describe what was happening to them. You know what I mean? And there was one specifically of someone whose 3 kids all enjoyed playing Overwatch together on Switch, I think they said. And they couldn't afford to buy those 3 kids' contract phones, and they can't just use their own phone, which means those 3 kids can no longer play Overwatch together. That's total bullshit. That's absolute bullshit.
I mean, it's just very badly thought out, isn't it? Given things like, you know, family plans and all that these days, that there was no way around that in that particular case. But the whole situation is mad and daft, and it does seem like that they knew that this could happen. This isn't like some unforeseen glitch that has only come out when the game launched. Like, this is a thing that is known, that has been mentioned in the terms for the Call of Duty inclusion. So not good. But on top of that, Overwatch's whole lot, like, I have not really seen or heard very much about the actual experience of playing the video game Overwatch 2, Mark, because for days people couldn't get into it. And then,
well, I was going to say, I think that's because a lot of people have had bother trying to actually do that.
And that's, you know, that happens again and again. I guess we have all just got used to it with service games, that they will launch and it will be a problem, but especially given that this was kind of replacing the previous game,
which is now completely gone. By the way,
you can't play
it's
it now,
completely
right? So
gone.
That's, you know, that's an added people can't even be like, oh, I'll just jump back onto the old game and the old servers for a wee while until things calm down. It's like, it's gone, so you just can't play anything if you're an Overwatch fan for a couple of days. But I'm sure it'll be fine, and I'm sure the game will turn out great, blah blah blah. But it's just, yeah, another example of a terrible launch for one of these all online service games.
Yeah, absolutely, man, absolutely. All right, Lewis, finishing off as we always do with a couple of shout-outs. Shout-out number 1, free games. It's our first podcast of the month, so this still counts.
That way we always win, Mark.
That way we always win. On PlayStation Plus Essentials, you're getting Hot Wheels Unleashed, Injustice 2, and Super Hot. And just so everyone knows going forward, for the subscription services for PlayStation Plus Extra and Premium and Game Pass, we're just going to give you the highlights, because frankly the amount of games that I had to read out was becoming ludicrous. So the highlights from PlayStation Plus / Premium tier are Grand Theft Auto Vice City, the Definitive Edition, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, plus a whole other host of Assassin's Creed games, Inside and the Medium. And then on the Premium tier, you're getting the Yakuza 3, 4 and 5 Remastered and Limbo. And on Xbox Game Pass, the highlights there are definitely Scorn and A Plague's Tale Requiem, which is coming out very soon, which I am very excited about, Lewis.
Yeah, two launch games there on the Game Pass side, which are exciting. We've been talking about Scorn for quite a while. I imagine it might not stick the landing, but I'm really keen to see how that pans out. And some decent stuff on the PlayStation side as well. So, some decent games to dive into for people that are subscribed to these services.
Definitely. I think that Scorn also might not stick the landing, but it doesn't have to get 9s and 10s.
No,
I mean,
no, exactly.
I'm not expecting that for it. I just want it to be an interesting, weird experience, which it looks very much as though it could nail that.
Yeah. And slimy.
All right, Lewis, news item number 2. CDPR have said a whole bunch of stuff recently and are now back in the good books, ? After the launch of Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty DLC, which I think we talked about last time we did a podcast, Lewis, and I think we were both saying, like, is anyone going to care about this DLC? As it turns out, yes, a shit ton of people cared about this, and Cyberpunk posted their most concurrent players on Steam since launch by a wide margin. They have also announced that they will be opening a new North American studio in Boston. They have also announced their gaming roadmap, probably most excitingly, for the very, very foreseeable future, Lewis. Firstly, they announced Project Polaris, which is a new Witcher trilogy, which will apparently be released in a 6-year publishing cycle. Then Project Sirius, which is a game that will be set in the Witcher universe, which will target a broader audience and will have single and multiplayer elements, which in my opinion is almost certainly shaping up to be a service game of some description. Then Project Canis Majoris, which is another fully fledged Witcher game set in the Witcher universe, but this one will be made by an external studio and will build on Polaris. Then Project Orion, which is the Cyberpunk sequel, which is a sequel I didn't know if we were ever going to get, Lewis, because of how badly that game launched. And apparently that will be getting made by this new Boston studio. And finally Project Harder, which is a new IP, the first original IP from CDPR. For those that don't know, The Witcher was previously a book and Cyberpunk was previously a board game. Apparently concept work started for this in 2021, so I imagine that this is a long way away. I imagine a lot of this is a long way away, to be honest with you. So, Lewis, we now know what CDPR are going to be doing for the next decade, I guess.
Yeah, well into the next generation by the sounds of things, yeah. On your first... I mean, this is all quite exciting, and I like The Witcher, and more Witcher stuff sounds good. I don't think a 6-year publishing cycle for a trilogy of games is likely to happen whatsoever.
Absolutely not.
Unless those are much smaller games, or it's one big game that gets released in 3 installments or something. Like, there's no way that's happening, so don't get excited about that. But yeah, just on that very first point that you made, like, I think people should very much still keep their concerns and their suspicions about CDPR up, because it wasn't just that Cyberpunk wasn't good, there was some really dodgy business decisions taken there, particularly around releasing a game for platforms that they should have known it wasn't fit for purpose on, and they don't get a free pass just because Edge Runners came out and gave a massive boost to Cyberpunk as a game, because that is what has happened.
That DLC, man. That is exactly what happened. Edge Runners absolutely killed it, and fair enough, and that has brought people into the game, and that's also fair enough, and they've done work on that game, and it may well be better, and that too is fair enough, but you don't get a pass for everything else that happened just because of that, to me. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think this is quite exciting. I agree. I think Edge Runners, well, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's great.
Have you watched it yet?
Arguably better than the game, yeah. In fact, not so arguably in my opinion, but anyway. I think a lot of this is very exciting. No, they don't get a free pass, and I would be incredibly sceptical of their upcoming marketing cycle for the new Witcher game, what I will say. Alright, let's shout out number 3. PlayStation Stars has launched in Europe this very day as we record this, Lewis. The loyalty program previously launched in Asia on September the 29th and in the Americas on October the 5th. Basically, there are 2 types of rewards that go along with this loyalty program. There are loyalty points and there are digital collectibles. Digital collectibles are exactly what they fucking sound like. The points can apparently be redeemed in a catalogue which may, quotes, include PlayStation Wallet Funds, exclusive digital collectibles, which are apparently somehow better than the other digital collectibles, and selected PlayStation Store products. Basically, it's very similar to the Nintendo Platinum/Gold coin system, but worse in just about every way, Lewis. But if you reach level 4 of the program, which means that you have bought 4 games on the PlayStation Store or earned, I think actually, 120 uncommon trophies, you get priority customer service support for some weird reason. Because obviously, Lewis, if you don't have the money to buy those 4 games or don't have the time to get those trophies, you can fucking wait in line.
Yeah, I think it's pretty grubby, all that, to be honest, when you started
it's so
breaking.
Dumb. It's so dumb.
When it sort of started to break that this was happening, I thought, Sony are going to come out and say like, oh, this is all just a big error, sorry, and they haven't, and it seems to be an actual feature of this. The idea that like if you need help with your PlayStation because it's broken in some fashion, that they'll be like, well, how many trophies have you got? That is
I know
just
that
so
exactly.
absurd.
That is insane that is even remotely in consideration.
Yeah, and digital collectibles. I mean, good grief. The points
It's
thing,
all
fine,
nonsense.
cool. That should have been the be all and end all. Like you actually mentioned before we started recording Nintendo's version of this, which you don't have to join up to. They just give you coins. You don't really use them for very much, but it's fine. Like it's just happening in the background. Cool. PlayStation have drawn a lot of attention to this, and I think that was an error.
Yes, I would agree. And don't get me wrong, like I will probably sign up to this because signing up to it basically does no harm whatsoever.
Yeah.
And maybe occasionally I get a few pounds in my PlayStation wallet or whatever, right? But I mean, it's just such a fucking waste of space, this thing. I really do think that. All right, listen, final shout out number 4. A new Meta Quest Pro has been revealed.
It has indeed, yeah. So Meta just held their Meta Connect event where they had a series of announcements, the big headline of which was the announcement of a Quest Pro coming on October 25th. It's got Touch Pro controllers, stylus tips, partial light blockers, a charging dock, 256 gig of RAM, various other high-tech bits and pieces that make it worth $1,500, Mark. That's how much this is going to retail for, which is about a week's worth of energy as things currently stand. But another kind of interesting news about the Quest Pro, I'm going to assume that no one that listens to us is likely to buy the Quest Pro, so that's going to be there in the background. But also coming to Quest are some slightly more interesting things perhaps. Xbox Cloud Gaming is coming to Meta Quest. No date on that yet, but essentially what this means is that you will be able to use an Xbox controller to play Game Pass Ultimate games within the 3D environment. Now, don't get me wrong, that does not mean that those games will be 3D or VR games. What it means is they're kind of putting a big 2D screen right in front of your eyes inside the helmet.
Liz, it's so dumb. It's so
It's
stupid.
kind of dumb. Again,
It's the worst of the metaverse.
considering that you need to have a good PC to run any, not just the Quest Pro, but any Quest product, you need a decent PC. And if you've got a decent PC, you've probably got a decent monitor, and most games would be better played in that way than within this.
Yeah, exactly.
the
You
metaverse.
already have the hardware to play those games better than in that Quest. Do you know what I mean?
And there will
It's
definitely
insane.
be some people who, will want to play a Halo in that environment or whatever. Fair enough. You've got that. There are some other things. They announced some games coming to the Quest, including Among Us, Iron Man VR, which was previously PlayStation exclusive, Walking Dead Saints and Sinners Chapter 2, and the big news really is that Skydance are also working on a new game called Behemoth, which is kind of survival game as far as we know at the moment. And they have acquired 3 studios, including Armature Studio, who made Resident Evil 4 VR, Camouflage Team, who made Iron Man VR, that is coming to the service now, and Twisted Pixel, who made Path of the Warrior, none of which I'm particularly familiar with, but new projects from all of those studios will be coming down the line.
Yeah, I mean, fair play to you, Meta. If you want to keep on
keeping on the old...
keep on keeping on with your very, very expensive Quest and your metaverse.
They have said that this is...
I think Zuckerberg's losing his mind.
Yeah.
To be honest, I think Zuckerberg's lost it.
They said this is the first entry in a new high-end line of devices, so this isn't even the end point.
Did they?
Yeah, and I do think,
God.
like you say, it's a sign of a company that is trying to get some money in, which is
Yes,
interesting.
I think that all of this screams of God, give me your money. We've sold all your data, now we need more money. All right, Lewis, I think it's time for a beer, and then we'll be back for Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week, a couple of weeks late, is our play-along of Inscryption list.
It is indeed, yeah. Promise we didn't just delay the show because we were stuck on this roguelike deck builder for too long at the start. Yeah, this is the critically acclaimed and also sort of cult hit of 2021. Inscryption is a roguelike deck builder. Roguelite? Not quite sure. Never quite sure, but rogue elements.
So basically always rogue light, if you want to be correct about it. But in reality, if you're someone who cares about that, please turn off this podcast.
Yeah. But it's also so much more than that. This game came from solo developer Daniel Mullins, who's made a few other games that I wasn't really aware of that have similar elements, which we'll come on to touch on. And also to call this a solo dev game is interesting because when the credits roll, there's a ton of names on there.
Yeah,
It's like,
it really wasn't. Yeah.
It's like like, yeah, I think maybe, designed by and led by one person. But anyway, the game came from Daniel Mullins' response to a game jam prompt, which was simply sacrifices must be made, and apparently he was getting really into Magic the Gathering at that point, and this game was born, and I think it's a real testament to his creativity. And I think also some of the feedback that he got from, early playtesters and stuff and people involved in that game jam, that this game grew into what it became, both internally and externally. Like what the game actually is and does is fascinating to think that that's where it started. But also this game was named multiple outlets like Best Game of last year. Polygon certainly named it their Best Game of 2021. It was nominated for Best Indie Game at the Game Awards. Most importantly, it won the Game of the Year at the GDC Awards last year, and it also won the Seamus McNally Grand Prize at the Independent Games Festival, which is quite maybe the most prestigious indie game award around, actually. It's a sort of...
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
And so
certainly one of them.
it won both of those. It's the first game that has ever won both of those top prizes. That sets out the caliber of this game, basically, which I think when it released, we both kind of overlooked a wee bit because we were like not massively into card games. But oh boy.
Not massively into card games, not massively into roguelikes, Lewis.
No.
And I have to say, I have to take umbrage immediately with you calling this a roguelike deck builder, because whoever wrote that in the synopsis of this game was a fucking liar.
Well,
because it's not that.
Before you elaborate on that, I want to say, we will by necessity have to spoil elements of this game, and it is definitely the kind of game that if you haven't played it and have any interest in playing it, it is better to go in as blind as possible. So if you might want to skip to the end of the podcast from here if you've not played it, because we will be talking about it. But this is a fascinating game that goes off, like you say, Mark, in so many directions, from it being a roguelike deck builder. Give us your overall thoughts, because you came into this game pretty blind as well, and after I had started playing it, what happened?
I came into this game entirely blind. I had no idea what the game was going to do at all. As far as I was aware, this was a roguelike deck builder, because that is exactly how it was sold to me, and almost immediately it becomes apparent that is not what it is. It starts with you playing the game that if you've seen anything about this game, you've seen you playing a card game opposite a sort of shadowy figure that's basically just eyes and weird hands, and it looks a bit horror-y and stuff like that. And I was expecting this to have way more horror elements than it actually did, apart from that creepy thing. But after several cycles of playing against this guy, and eventually when you beat him, the game changes entirely. And by changes entirely, I mean it changes to an old school Nintendo SNES style 8-bit RPG. That, it immediately changes to that. Then when you've done that section, it changes to a Souls-like card game that's sort of like similar to the first one that you played, but again not quite, and sort of different, and they constantly change the rules of how the card games work. You're playing card games throughout all of this, but they change the rules of how they work, and as such your strategies have to change. This game was fucking wild, man. It just completely blew me away. It went in completely different directions that I wasn't expecting it to go. It also has, I completely forgot as well, it also has the meta thing that's happening as well, and that you are supposedly playing as a guy who discovered this game by accident, or through like a series of weird consequences that we don't particularly have to go into here. Yeah. And basically discovered this game and is filmed all in FMV. It is so much bigger and so much wider and so much more interesting than I ever would have given it credit for. Yep. That is what I would say.
Totally agree with that. I mean, I think there's two things right at the kickoff of the game. The fact that when you first boot it, and it does have this kind of like glitchy computer effect, which doesn't feel in keeping with the game, as you were describing, Mark, in Leslie's Cabin, that you'd kind of seen in the marketing material. When you're there's no new game option, there's only continue. That immediately
you have to start with continue.
That rings bells. You're like, what's going on? There's something odd here. And then the very first time that you realise that you can step away from the table, because you've got this top-down view of the kind of game map that you're playing, and you're journeying through this kind of swamp or whatever it is on the game board, and suddenly you can get up and leave that, and you can walk around Leslie's Cabin. That's when you start to find all these other puzzles, and it's kind of got this like escape room vibe about it a wee bit, where you're trying to solve.
It does. That's a great point of comparison.
Yeah, you're kind of trying to work out these little individual puzzles that are connected to one another, and then begin to feed it into the card game, and that card game is what will allow you to get out of this room eventually. I mean, that alone in itself, the amount of surprises within that would be enough for a a discussion, but then, like you say, the game becomes something that looks more like the original Pokemon games and changes. Like, I think that's the key thing to mention here, really. The card game is maintained throughout. The rules change slightly, how it operates changes slightly, so it's the middle section, which I think gameplay-wise was maybe the best, is not really roguelike.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
I liked that the second section, you weren't relying on the luck of the draw in terms of the cards that you could get and the deck that you could build, and that you could actually be much more tactical about it. Like, there were still random elements in that you would find card packs and stuff like that, but you could, before any encounter, you could go in and shuffle your deck and make sure that it was built in a way that you wanted it to be built.
Oh, I see what you mean. I actually thought that I massively depended on the luck of the draw more.
Oh, really?
The second section. That's really quite interesting. And it's interesting that you would say that's the strongest section, because I would say that is the weakest section for me. That is incredibly
to me, I mean,
insane.
I guess I was thinking that particularly before I got onto the third section, which, as you were saying, brings in these kind of Soulsy elements. And again, for anyone who's listened this far, I suppose, who hasn't played it, don't be put off by that. It's not Soulsy in that it becomes like radically difficult or anything. It just
no. It's not Soulsy in that it's difficult. It's Soulsy in that when you die, you lose all your money and start back at Metroidvania. Might be a better
exactly.
term.
Yeah, you go back to a checkpoint and you have to get back to that point without dying again. Although in practice, it's actually really easy. Most of the levels have kind of shortcuts through them, which means you don't actually even have to go through another encounter. But
which again is quite Souls-like.
It's quite Souls-like, and the thing it just introduces threat. That whole final section feels, because the actual gameplay by that point, you're so used to the card game that it is quite straightforward often to get through fights. Although I'll come back to that point as well. But that overworld aspect in the third section, it makes you feel more tense, because you're like, oh god, I really don't want to lose a fight, because I'm trying to get through this and maintain my money so I can buy upgrades and blah blah blah. But the other thing that third section does, I think, that builds on everything that the card game was doing before, is switches to the energy accumulation kind of mechanic. So up until that point, you're generally speaking, and this is very simplified, but sacrificing cards in order to then play a better card. Oh, that's the whole rhythm of the game. You play a squirrel, you have to kill the squirrel. That gives you blood. Yeah, initially. That gives you blood so that you can play something that's slightly better. And depending on which starting deck you pick in the second stage, and which order you do things in an Act 2, I suppose you could have quite different experiences. But the third section adds this, basically turn by turn you get an energy cell, and you can't play your better cards until your energy cells go up. And so you're forced to play...
Yeah, so you have to wait a certain amount of turns before you can play your best cards.
And you're forced to play really defensively and actually live on the brink of death quite often, which I thought was really fantastic, because by that point, as you're getting used to the card game, you kind of know your best hand, you know the best strategies, and suddenly you're having to go, I'm going to have to accept like 3 or 4 hits here, but when I do that, I will be able to play this grizzly bear and it's going to fuck everything up.
No, I agree, actually. Like, in terms of like the actual mechanics of the card games, I think that the last one was actually the one I enjoyed playing the most. I think that the first one, probably if you burrowed deep down into it and you actually got the data out or whatever, probably is the more strategic,
possibly,
more thoughtful game. But the one that I enjoyed playing the most, I would agree with you, actually, I think probably is that third one.
Yeah, it's got way more kind of like
peril, I suppose.
Peril,
yeah, right. Like, it still challenges you even at that stage of the game when you're very used to how the mechanics work at that point.
I mean, the perfect example of that is the few times that you have to do those bomb diffusion levels, fights within that third section where you have to do a certain amount of damage in a certain amount of time, basically. Yeah, you've got 6 turns to do X amount of damage to this bomb or to the other player in order to switch off this bomb, and every time you basically complete it with like 1 turn left to go, and it feels just very well balanced and well scripted like that. And there is obviously still an element of randomness about the card draw, but you're not actually, can't be certain that any of that is random, really. Like, the computer could be working all that out. That's another story. But yeah, so much going on in this gameplay wise. So yeah, I'm intrigued. Just to touch on it quickly, if you thought the second part was weaker, because one of my questions I wanted to ask you here was, like, do you think it loses anything with the amount of changes it goes through? Because I guess if you're loving the first part and then suddenly you're playing Act 2, you might be a bit like, oh shit, you know?
In terms of the gameplay, yes, I actually do think that it loses something from the first part to the second part. However, the story by that point is so fucking intriguing, it doesn't matter. Like that is pulling you through. Like, again, like, there's the story that's happening in the game, there's what you as the gamer are feeling, then there's this meta other character that you're supposedly playing the game as well. It's quite a lot going on, and none of it's massively explained. Again, a lot of show don't tell going on. very big fans of that here at PlayersToo. Yeah, I was enthralled with it by that point, by the story. So that drug me through, even if I wasn't enjoying that quite as much as the original card game. And you're basically playing 4 different card games in that section, all amalgamated together in your one deck. Whereas the first section was like you were playing this one specific card game, and then the last section was like this one specific card game. And I think that just worked better just because you weren't trying to mash so much stuff together. You were just playing these 2 quite distinct games, and I think that just worked better from a mechanics point of view. But in terms of the story, like I was way deep into the story by that point. I was just like, I am well into this, and I just want to finish it. Like I wasn't really considering so much, like in the moment to moment of actually playing it, I wasn't thinking, oh well, this is a bit of a downgrade from the first bit. But if you made me make a decision on that, I would say that probably is true, but it didn't matter by that point. I mean, it didn't matter.
I would fully agree with that. I mean, even as I say, I felt the second section was kind of stronger. I was actually thinking there how it feels almost like the sort of idea of gym leaders in the Pokemon games, that second section. So, there's kind of like these 4 different ways of approaching it. Anyway, just going back to gameplay, just wanted to mention that because I'm intrigued that you were less invested in that given your Pokemon history. But yeah, the fact by the end of that first act, when you defeat Leshy, and even before you're out of the cabin and things start to go haywire, and you do get to see the FMV sequences for the first time. Now, at the top of this, we said that we went in blind. I went in pretty blind. I knew some weird stuff was going to come from it, and I knew it wasn't straightforwardly just a deck builder game. I had no idea that any of that was coming. And so the first time that just the FMV sequences come up, you're just like, holy shit, like what is this? What is this going to be now? And I thought all of those sections, by the way, were really well performed, really well scripted, like just gave you enough intrigue and drama within the... I mean, most of them are absolute maximum of about 40 seconds long or something. These sequences, some of them much shorter. But it just really drags you in, and that character, the Lucky Carder, as he calls himself, he's sort of a card game YouTuber, essentially. So that's, like, this whole game speaks to gamers so much. It is about the experience of playing games in a lot of ways, and like how much we fall for them and fall in love with them, and but also all the other horrible shit around these kinds of hobbies as well, potentially. Yeah, the direction it goes in from there, and that's sort of the moment that you realise that you, not only within the card game are you this person, but then in the meta level where you're sat in a room with Leshy, you are this person, but then you're also at another stage watching what is happening in this person's real life. It is so meta and so expertly done, I thought, kind of until the ending, which I did think just sort of wrapped it up without really explaining very much, but wanted to kind of finish with a dramatic flourish, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of agree with that. I thought that it could have been wrapped up a bit better, but I'm not holding that against it. You know what I mean? As you said, this was a sort of a solo project, although as you said in the credits, there was quite a lot more than one person. But it was a small project, you know what I mean? And like, considering the breadth of the rest of it, I'm not holding that against anybody.
Not at all. No,
it was a truly fantastic game, and as I said, it is so much better, so much deeper. There's so much more going on in it than I ever remotely considered going into this. To be honest with you, Lewis, this was on the list to play as like, and so we're doing this because it's October, by the way, and we thought we would do a couple of horror games, and this was very much your pick. I wasn't massively excited to play this, again, because it was a deck builder, which I'm not massively into, and it was a roguelike, which famously I do not like. This game is neither of those things, really. and
in reality, and if you have listened up to this point and have probably had quite a lot of the game spoiled for you, I'm sure you would still get a lot of interest from it, but that the actual mechanics of playing that roguelike deck builder bit are good fun, and there's a lot of enjoyment to be had there, but there is just so much more to it than that. And if you do play it and you get frustrated in that Act 1, just keep going, because it's not even just to say like, oh, it's worth it because it gets better. It's just a different game. It is literally a different game after a while.
It is literally a different game. Yeah, I could not agree with that more.
And you'll want to experience it. I'm so glad we played this, Mike. I think it's an astonishing game and a huge
me too. I totally agree. I am so happy that I've played this. It is genuinely one of the best indie games I've played in years. It is tremendously good. Tremendously good. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have to call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find Players2 on all the social media, that is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerSTOO.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that really, really, really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure to the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, that helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. It genuinely does mean a lot. Now it's time to announce our new play-along game for this month. And granted, we realise that we're starting this month halfway through the month because of scheduling issues, but over the next 2 weeks, we're going to be playing Mundaun, which is another spooky game for spooky season in October, Liz. Very, very much excited to play this. Another solo project, I believe. Really, really interesting art style. Much more my vibe on the surface level, I will say, than Inscryption was, despite the fact I ended up loving that. I've been looking forward to playing this for a long time.
Yeah, me too. Definitely been looking forward to it. So yeah, this is coming from Swiss developer Hidden Fields. It came out just last year. Absolutely stunning hand-drawn art style to it.
Incredible.
Which is kind of what drew us and everyone else into it. But yeah, really looking forward to playing this, and it looks like it's about 8 hours long, so about half the length of Inscryption, so still plenty of time to get it played before we record at the start of the month.
Definitely. Considering this is when I usually start playing our play-along games.
If even, yeah.
It's totally fine. You easily get this another time. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.